Thank you. A Thursday night has come once again. If you can hear me, I don't know. I was saying, it is Thursday once again, and we are here to read more Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. I hope everyone has had a lovely day, and I mean that. I actually had a lovely day for real, which is a blessing. It is getting chilly outside, which is so nice. So, yes, everything is going pretty decently besides the whole world. But nothing I can do about that on this here stream. But yeah, we're going to be continuing Pride and Prejudice, so get comfy. And I just reread a bit of a summary of these last few chapters so I wouldn't feel very lost. So, yeah, we are starting off on chapter 15, but before we do that, I'm going to read the last paragraph of chapter 14. So, yeah, I'm just going to bring up my Twitch real quick. Okay, I'm gonna get started. Okay, chapter 15. Mr. Collins was not. Oh, I'm sorry. This is the end of chapter 14. Then turning to Mr. Bennet, he offered himself as an antagonist at backgammon. Mr. Bennet accepted the challenge, observing that he acted very wisely in leaving the girls to their own trifling amusements. Mrs. Bennet and her daughters apologized most civilly for Lydia's interruption and promised that it should not occur again, and if he would resume his book, but Mr. Collins, after assuming that he bore his young cousin at ill will and should never resent her behavior as any affront, seated himself at another table with Mr. Bennet and prepared for backgammon. Okay. Let me just grab a hair tie real quick. Something to fidget with. There we go. Okay. All right. Chapter 15. Mr. Collins was not a sensible man, and the deficiency of nature had been put little assisted by education or society, the greatest part of his life having been spent under the guidance of an illiterate and miserly father, and though he belonged to one of the universities, he had merely kept the necessary terms, without forming it any useful acquaintance. The subjection in which his father had brought him up had given him originality, originally great humility of nature, but it was now a good deal counteracted by the self-conceit of a weak hand, living in retirement, and the consequential feelings of early and unexpected prosperity. A fortunate chance had recommended him to Lady Catherine de Bow when the living of Hunsford was vacant, and the respect which he felt for her high rank and his veneration for her as his patroness, mingling with a very good opinion of himself, of his authority as a clergyman, and his rights as a rector, made him altogether a mixture of pride and obsequiousness, self-importance, and humility. Having now a good house and very sufficient income, he intended to marry, and in seeking a reconciliation with the long-born family, he had a wife in view, as he meant to choose one of the daughters, if he found them as handsome and amiable as they were represented by common report. This was his plan of amends, of atonement, for inheriting his father's estate, and he thought it an excellent one, full of eligibility and suitedness, and excessively generous and disinterested on his own part. His plan did not vary on seeing them. Miss Bennet's lovely face confirmed his views and established all his um, strictest notions of what was due to seniority, and for the first evening she was his settled choice. The next morning, however, made an alteration, for in a quarter of an hour's tete-a-tete with Mrs. Bennet before breakfast, a conversation beginning with his parsonage house, and leading naturally to the avowal of his hopes that a mistress, for it might be found in Longbourn, produced from her, amid very complacent smiles and general encouragement, a caution against the very Jane he had fixed on. As to her younger daughters, she could not take upon her to say. She could not positively answer, but she did not know of any preposition. Her eldest daughter, she must just mention. She felt it incumbent on her to hint, was likely to be very soon engaged. Mr. Collins had only to change from Jane to Elizabeth, and it was soon done while Mrs. Bennet was stirring the fire. Elizabeth, equally next to Jane in birth and beauty, succeeded her, of course. Mrs. Bennet treasured up the hint, and trusted that she might soon have 2 daughters married, and the man whom she could not bear to speak of the day before was now high in her good graces. Lydia's intention of walking to Meryton was not forgotten. Every sister except Mary agreed to go with her, and Mr. Collins was to attend them, at the request of Mr. Bennet, who was most anxious to get rid of him, and have his library to himself, for thither Mr. Collins had followed him after breakfast, and there he would continue, nominally engaged to one of the largest folios in the collection, but really talking to Mr. Bennet, with little seatingly. In his library, he had been always sure of leisure and tranquillity, and though prepared, as he told Elizabeth, to meet with folly and conceit, in every other room in the house he was used to be free from there. His civility, therefore, was most prompt in inviting Mr. Collins to join his daughters in their walk. And Mrs. Collins, being in fact much better fitted a walker than a reader, was extremely well pleased to close his large book and go. In pompous nothings on his side, and civil assents on that of his cousins, their time passed till they entered Meryton. The attention of the younger ones was then no longer gained by him. Their eyes were immediately wandered up the street in quest of the officers, and nothing less than a very smart bonnet indeed, or a really new muslin in the in the shop window could recall them. But the attention of every lady was soon caught by a young man whom they had never seen before, of most gentlemanlike appearance, walking with an officer on the other side of the way. The officer was the very Mr. Denny, concerning whose return from London Lydia came to inquire, and he bowed as I passed. All were struck with the stranger's air. All wondered who he could be, and Kitty and Lydia, determined, if possible, to find out, led the way across the street, under pretense of wanting something of an opposite shop, and fortunately had just gained the pavement when 2 gentlemen, turning back, had reached the same spot. Mr. Denny addressed them directly, and entreated permission to introduce his friend, Mr. Wickham, who had returned with him the day before from town, and he was happy to say he had accepted a commission in their corps. This was exactly as it should be. For the young man wanted only regimentals to make him completely charming. His appearance was greatly for his favor. He had all the best part of beauty, a fine countenance, a good figure, and very pleasing address. The introduction was followed by, up on his side of a happy readiness of conversation, a readiness at the same time perfectly correct and unassuming. And the whole party was still standing and talking together very agreeably when the sound of horses drew their notice, and Darcy and Bigley were seen riding down the street. On distinguishing the ladies of the group, the two gentlemen came directly toward him, and began the usual civilities. Bingley was the gentleman. Oh, Bingley was the principal spokesman, and Miss Bennet the principal object. He was then, he said, on his way to Longbourn to propose to inquire after her. Mr. Darcy collaborated it with a bow, and was beginning to determine not to fix his eyes on Elizabeth, when they were suddenly arrested by the sight of a stranger. And Elizabeth, happening to see the countenance of both as they looked at each other, was all astonishment at the effect of the meeting. Both had changed color. One looked white, and the other red. Mr. Wickman, after a few moments, touched his hat, a salutation which Mr. Darcy just deigned to return. What could be the meaning of it? It was impossible to imagine, and it was impossible not to long to know. In another minute, Mr. Bingley, but without seeming to have noticed what passed, took leave and rode on with his friend. Mr. Denny and Mr. Wickman walked with the young ladies to the door of Mr. Phillip's house, and then they made their bows, in spite of Miss Lydia's pressing entreaties that they would come in, and even in spite of Miss Phillips throwing up the parlor window and loudly seconding the invitation. Mrs. Phillips was always glad to see her nieces, and two eldest, from their recent absence, were particularly welcome. I just realized I titled this stream incorrectly. Too late. I'll keep going. Mrs. Phillips was always glad to see her nieces, and the two eldest, from their recent absence, were particularly welcome, and she was eagerly expressing her surprise at their sudden home, which, as their own carriage had not fetched them, she would have known nothing about, as if she had not happened to see Mr. Jones's shop-boy in the street, who had told her that they were not to send any more draughts to Netherfield, because the Miss Bennets were come away, and her civility was claimed toward Mr. Collins by Jane's introduction of him. She received him with her very best politeness, which he returned with as much more, apologizing for his intrusion, without any previous acquaintance with her, which he could not help flattering himself, however, might be justified by his relationship to the young ladies who introduced him to her notice. Mrs. Phillips was quite awed by such excess of good breeding, but her contemplation of one stranger was soon put to an end by exclamations and enquiries about the other, of whom, however, she soon put to an end by the explanation and enquiries of another, of whom, however, she could only tell her nieces that they already knew that Mr. Denny had brought him from London, and that he was to have a lieutenant's commission in the shire. She had been watching him the last hour, she said, and he walked up and down the street. And had Mr. Wickham appeared, Kitty and Lydia would certainly have continued their occupation, but unluckily, no one passed the windows now except a few of the officers, who, in comparison with the stranger, were becoming stupid, disagreeable fellows. Some of them were to dine with the Phillipses the next day, and their aunt promised to make her husband call on Mrs. Wickham and give him an invitation also, if the family from Longbourn would come in for the evening. This was agreed to, and Mrs. Phillips protested that they would have a nice, comfortable, noisy game of lottery tickets and a little bit of hot supper afterwards. The prospect of such delights was very cheering, and they parted in mutual good spirits. The Collins repeated his apologies in quitting the room, and was assured with unwavering civility that they were perfectly needless. As they walked home, Elizabeth related to Jane what she had seen pass between the two gentlemen. But though Jane would have defended either or both, had they appeared to be wrong, she could no more explain such behavior than her sister. Mr. Collins, on his return, highly gratified Mrs. Bennet by admiring Mr. Phillip's manners and politeness. He protested that, except Lady Catherine and her daughter, he had never seen a more elegant woman, for she had not only received him with the utmost civility, but had even pointedly included him in her invitation for the next evening, although utterly unknown to her before. Something, he supposed, might be attributed to his connection with them, but yet he had never met with so much attention in the whole course of his life. Okay. All right. Chapter 16. As so, no objection was made to the young people's engagement with their aunt, and all Mr. Collins' scruples of leaving Mr. and Mrs. Bennet for a single evening during his visit were most steadily resisted. The coach conveyed him and his 5 cousins at a suitable hour to Meryton, and the girls had the pleasure of hearing, as they entered the drawing-room, that Mr. Wickham had accepted their uncle's invitation, and was then in the house. When his information was given, and they had all taken their seats, Mr. Collins was at leisure to look around him and admire, and he was so much struck with the scenes and furniture of the apartment that he declared he might almost have supposed himself in the small summer breakfast parlor at Rosings, a comparison that did not at first convey much gratification. But when Mrs. Phillips understood from him what Rosings was, and who was its proprietor, when she had listened to this description of the only one of Lady Catherine's drawing-rooms, and found that the chimney-piece alone had cost £800, she felt all the force of the compliment, and would hardly have resented a comparison with the housekeeper's room. In describing to all of her the grandeur of Lady Catherine and her mansion, with occasional digressions in praise of her own humble abode, and the improvements it was receiving, he was happily employed until the gentleman joined him, and he found in Mrs. Phillips a very attentive listener, whose opinion of his consequence increased with what he heard, and who was resolving to retail it among his neighbors as soon as he could. To the girls, who could not listen to their cousin, who had nothing to do but to wish for an instrument and examine their own indifferent limitations of china or the mantelpiece, the interval of waiting appeared very long. It was over to last, however. The gentleman did approach, and when Mr. Wickham walked into the room, Elizabeth felt that she had neither been seeing him before nor thinking of him since, with the smallest degree of unreasonable admiration. The officers of the shire were, in general, a very creditable, gentlemanlike set, and the best of them were of the present party, but Mr. Wickham was as far beyond them all in person, countenance, air, and walk, as they were superior to the broad-faced, stuffy Uncle Phillips, breathing port wine, who followed them into the room. Mr. Wickham was the happy man toward whom almost every female eye was turned, and Elizabeth was the happy woman by whom he finally seated himself. And the agreeable manner in which he immediately fell into conversation, though it was only on its being a wet night and on the probability of a rainy season, made her feel that the commonest, dullest, most threadbare topic might be rendered interesting by the skill of the speaker. I really like that line. With such rivals for the notice of the fair as Mr. Wickham and the officers, Mr. Collins seemed likely to sink into insignificance. For the young ladies, he certainly was nothing, but he had still at intervals a kind listener to Mr. Phillips, and was, by her watchfulness, most abundantly supplied with coffee and muffin. When the card tables were placed, he had an opportunity of obliging her in return by sitting down to whist. I know a little of the game at present, said he, but I shall be glad to improve myself, for in my situation of life, Mrs. Phillips was very thankful for his compliance, but she could not wait for his reason. Mr. Wickham did not play at whist, and with ready delight he was received at the other table between Elizabeth and Lydia. At first there seemed danger of Lydia's engrossing him entirely, for she was a most determined talker, being likewise extremely fond of lottery tickets. She soon grew too much interested in the game, too eager of making bets and exclaiming after prizes, to have attention for anyone in particular. Allowing for the common demands of the game, Mr. Wickham was therefore at leisure to talk to Elizabeth, and she was very willing to hear him, although what she chiefly wished to hear she could not hope to behold, the history of his acquaintance with Mr. Darcy. She dared not even mention that gentleman. Her curiosity, however, was unexpectedly relieved. Mr. Wickham began the subject himself. How inquired how far Netherfield was from Meryton, and, after receiving her answer, asked in a hesitating manner how long Mr. Darcy had been staying there. "About a month," said Elizabeth, and then, unwilling to let the subject drop, added, "He is a man of very large property in Derbyshire, I understand." "Yes," replied Wickham. "His estate there is a noble one, a clear 10,000 per annum. He could not have met with a person more capable of giving you certain information of that head than myself, for I have been connected with his family in a particular manner from my infancy." Elizabeth could not but look surprised. "You may well be surprised, Miss Bennet, at such an assertion, after seeing, as you probably might, the very cold manner of our meeting yesterday. Are you much acquainted with Mr. Darcy?" "As much as I ever wished to be," cried Elizabeth warmly. "I have spent 4 days in the same house with him. I think him very disagreeable." "I have no right to give my opinion," said Mr. Wickham, "as to his being agreeable or otherwise. I am not qualified to form one. I have known him too long and too well to be a fair judge. It is impossible for me to be impartial. But I believe your opinion of him would in general astonish, and perhaps you would not express it quite so strongly anywhere else. Here you are, in your own family." "Upon my word, I say no more here than I say in my house, in my neighborhood, except Netherfield. He is not at all liked in Hertfordshire. Everybody is disgusted with his pride. You will not find him more favorably spoken of by anyone." "I cannot pretend to be sorry," said Wickham, after a short interruption, "that he or any man should not be estimated beyond their deserts, but with him I believe it does not often happen. The world is blinded by his fortune of consequence, or frightened by his high and imposing manners, and sees him only as he chooses to be seen. I should take him, even on my slight acquaintance, to be an ill-tempered man, Wickham said. Wickham only shook his head. I wonder, said he, at the next opportunity of speaking, whether he is likely to be in this country much longer. I do not at all know, but I heard nothing of his going away when I was in Netherfield. I hope your plans in favor of the Shire will not be affected by his being in the neighborhood. Oh, no, it is not for me to be driven away by Mr. Darcy. If he wishes to avoid seeing me, he must go. We are not on friendly terms, and it always gives me pain to meet him. But I have no reason to be avoiding him, but what I might proclaim to be all the world a sense of very great ill usage, and most painful regrets at his being what he is. His father, Mrs. Bennet, the late Mr. Darcy, was one of the best men that had ever breathed, and the truest friend I ever had. I can never be in company with this Mr. Darcy without being grieved to a soul by 1,000 tender recollections. His behavior to myself has been scandalous, but I verily believe I could forgive him anything and everything rather than his disappointing the hopes and disgracing the memory of his father. Elizabeth found the interest of the subject increase, and listened with all her heart, but the delicacy of it prevented farther enquiry. Mr. Wickham began to speak on more general topics, Meryton, the neighborhood, the society, appearing highly pleased with all he had yet seen, and speaking of the latter especially with gentle but very intelligible gallantry. It was the prospect of constant society and good society, he added, which was my chief inducement to enter the Shire. I knew it to be most respectful, agreeable corps, and my friend Denny tempted me farther by his account of their present quarters, and the very great attentions and excellent acquaintance Meryton had procured them. So, society, I own, is necessary to me. I have been a disappointed man, and my spirits will not bear solitude. I must have employment and society. Military life is not what I intended for, but circumstances have now made it eligible. A church ought to have been my profession. I was brought up for the church, and I should at this time have been in possession of a most valuable living, had it pleased the gentleman we were speaking of just now. Indeed. Yes, the late Mr. Darcy bequeathed me the next presentation of the best living in his gift. He was my godfather, and excessively attached to me. I cannot do justice to his kindness. He meant to provide for me amply, and though he had done it, but when the living fell, was given elsewhere. Good heavens, cried Elizabeth, but how could that be? How could his will be disregarded? Why did you not seek legal redress? There was such an informality in the terms of his bequest as to give me no hope from law. A man of honor could not have doubted the intention, but Mr. Darcy chose to doubt it, or to treat it as merely conditional recommendation, and to assert that I had forfeited all claim to it by extravagance, imprudence, in short, anything or nothing. Certain it is that the living became vacant 2 years ago, exactly as I was of an age to hold it, and that it was given to another man. And no less certain it is that I cannot accuse myself of having really done anything to deserve to lose it. I have a warm, unguarded temper, and I may perhaps have sometimes spoken my opinion of him and to him too freely. I can recall nothing worse. But the fact is, we are very different sort of men. and that he hates me. That is quite shocking. He deserves to be publicly disgraced. Sometimes or other he will be, but it shall not be by me. Till I can forget his father, I can never defy or expose him. Elizabeth honored him for such feelings, and thought him handsomer than ever that he expressed them. But what, said she after a pause, can have been his motive? Can he have introduced him to behave so cruelly? A thorough, determined dislike of me, a dislike which I cannot but attribute in some measure to be jealousy. Had the late Mr. Darcy liked me less, his son might have been born with me better, but his father's uncommon attachment to me irritated him, and I believe very early in life. He had not a temper to bear the sort of competition in which we stood, the sort of preference which was often given me. I had not thought Mr. Darcy so bad at this, though I had never liked him. I had not thought so very ill of him. I had supposed him to be despising his fellow creatures in general, but did not suspect him of descending to such a malicious revenge, such injustice, such inhumanity as this. After a few minutes' reflection, however, she continued, I do remember his boasting one day at Netherfield of the implacability of his resentment, of his having an unforgiving temper. His disposition was much dreadful. I will not trust myself on the subject, replied Wickham. I can hardly be just him. Elizabeth was again deep in thought, and after a time exclaimed, to treat in such a manner the godson, the friend, the favorite of his father, she could have added, a young man, too, like you, whose very countenance may vouch for your being amiable. But she contented herself with, and one, too, who had probably been his very own companion from childhood, connected together, and I think you said, in the closest manner. We were born in the same parish, within the same park. The greatest part of our youth was passed together, inmates of the same house, sharing the same amusements, objects of the same parental care. My father began life in the profession which your uncle, Mr. Phillips, appears to do so much credit to, but he gave up everything to be of use to the late Mr. Darcy, and devoted all his time to the care of the Pemberley property. He was most highly esteemed by Mr. Darcy, a most intimate, confidential friend. Mr. Darcy often acknowledged himself to be under the greatest obligations to my father's active superintendence, and when immediately before my father's death Mr. Darcy gave him a voluntary promise of providing for me, I am convinced that he felt it to be as much a debt of gratitude to him or of affection to myself. How strange, cried Elizabeth. How abominable! I wonder if the very pride of Mr. Darcy has not made him just of you. If from no better motive, then he should not have been too proud to be dishonest. For dishonesty, I must call it. It is wonderful, replied Wickham, for almost all his actions may be traced to pride, and pride has often been his best friend. It has connected him nearer with virtue than any other feeling. But we are none of us consistent, and in his behavior of me there are stronger impulses ever than pride. Can such abominable pride as his have ever done him good? Yes. It has often led him to be liberal and generous, to give his money freely, to display hospitality, to assist his tenants, to relieve the poor. Family pride, infallible pride, for he is very proud of what his father was, have done this. Not to appeal to disgrace his family, to degenerate from the popular qualities, or lose the influence of the Pemberley house. It is a powerful motive. He has also brotherly pride, which, with some brotherly affection, makes him a very kind and careful guardian to his sister. And you will hear him generally cried up as the most attentive and best of brothers. What sort of a girl is Miss Darcy? He shook his head. I wish I could call her amiable. It gives me pain to speak ill of a Darcy. But she is too much like her brother. Very, very proud. As a child, she was affectionate and pleasing, and extremely fond of me, and I have devoted hours and hours to her amusement. But she is nothing to me now. She is a handsome girl, about 15 or 16, and I understand highly accomplished. Since her father's death, her home has been in London, where a lady lives with her and superintends her education. After many pauses and many trials of other subjects, Elizabeth could not help uh, reverting once more to the first and saying, I am astonished at his intimacy with Mr. Bingley. How can Mr. Bingley, who seems good humor himself and is, I really believe, truly amiable, be in friendship with such a man? How can they suit each other? Do you know Mr. Bingley? Not at all. He is a sweet-tempered, amiable, charming man. Amiable. Amiable? I don't know. He cannot know what Mr. Darcy is. Probably not, but Mr. Darcy can please where he chooses. He does not want abilities. He does not want a conversable companion if he thinks it worth his while. Among those who are his equals, in consequence, he is a very different man from what he is to the less prosperous. His pride never deserts him. But with the rich, he is liberal-minded, just, sincere, rational, honorable, and perhaps agreeable, allowing something for fortune and figure. The whist party soon afterwards breaking up, the players gathered round the other table, and Mr. Collins took his station between his cousin Elizabeth and Mr. Phillips. The usual inquiries as to his success were made by the latter. It had not been very great, and he had lost every point, but when Mr. Phillips began to express her concern thereupon, he assured her with the greatest gravity that it was not of the least importance, that he considered the money a mere trifle, and begged she would not make herself uneasy. I know very well, madam, he said, that when people sit down to a card table, they must take their chance of these things. And happily, I am not in such circumstance that to make 5 shillings an object. There are undoubtedly many who could not say the same, but thanks to Lady Catherine de Bow, I am removed far beyond the necessity of regarding little matters. May we all be so lucky. Mr. Wickham's attention was caught, and after observing Mr. Collins for a few moments, he asked Elizabeth in a low voice whether her relation were very intimately acquainted with the family of de Bow. Lady Catherine de Bow. She replied, has very largely given him a living. I hardly know how Mr. Collins was first introduced to her notice, but he certainly has not known her for her long. You know, of course, that Lady Catherine de Bow and Lady Anne Darcy were sisters, consequently that she is aunt to the present Mr. Darcy. No, indeed I did not. I knew nothing at all of Lady Catherine's connections. I never heard of her existence till the day before yesterday. Her daughter, Miss de Bow, will have a very large fortune, and it is believed that she and her cousin will unite the 2 estates. This information made Elizabeth smile, as she thought of poor Miss Bingley. Vain, indeed, must be all her attentions, vain and useless her affection for her sister, and her praise of himself, if he were already self-designed to another. "Mr. Collins," said she, "speaks highly of both Lady Catherine and her daughter, but for some particulars that he has related of her ladyship, I suspect his gratitude misleads him, and that in spite of her being his patroness, she is an arrogant, conceited woman." "I believe her to be both in a great degree," replied Wickham. "I have not seen her for many years, but I still well remember that I never liked her, and that her manners were dictatorial and insolent. She has the reputation of being remarkably sensible and clever, but I rather believe she derives part of her abilities from her rank and fortune, part from her authoritative manner, and the rest from her pride of her nephew, who chooses that everyone connected with him should have an understanding of the first class." Elizabeth allowed that he had given a very rational account of it, and that continued talking together with mutual satisfaction till supper put an end to cards, and gave the rest of the ladies their share of Mr. Wickham's attentions. There could be no conversation in the noise of Mrs. Phillips's supper party, but his manners recommended him to everybody. Whatever he said was said well, and whatever he did, done gracefully. Elizabeth went away with her head full of him. She could not think of nothing but Mr. Wickham and of what he had told her, all the way home. But there was not time for her even to mention his name as they went, for neither Lydia nor Mr. Collins were once silent. Lydia talked incessantly of lottery tickets, of the fish she had lost and the fish she had won, and Mr. Collins, in describing the civility of Mr. and Mrs. Phillips, protesting that he did not in the least regard his losses at whist, enumerating all the dishes at supper, and repeatedly fearing that he clouded his cousins, had more to say than he could well manage before the carriage stopped at Longbourn House. Okay, that was chapter 16. 1, 2, 3. Okay, the next chapter is only 3 pages, so I'm going to read chapter 17, and then I will be done for the night after that. Yeah. Okay, chapter 17. Elizabeth related to Jane the next day what had passed between Mr. Wickham and herself. Jane listened with astonishment and concern. She knew not how to believe that Mr. Darcy could be so unworthy of Mr. Bingley's regard, and yet it was not in her nature to question the veracity of a young man of such amiable appearance as Wickham. The possibility of his having endured such kindness was enough to interest all her tender feelings, and nothing therefore remained to be done but to think well of them both, to defend the conduct of each, and throw into the account or accident of mistake, whether could not be otherwise explained. "They have both," said she, "been deceived, I dare say, in some way or other, of which we can form no idea. Interested people have perhaps misinterpreted each to the other. It is, in short, impossible for us to conjure the causes or circumstances which may have perhaps misrepresented each to the other. It is, for short, impossible for us to conjecture the causes or circumstances which may have alienated them without actual blame on either side." "Very true, indeed. And now, my dear Jane, what have you got to say in behalf of the interested people who have probably been concerned in the business? Do you clear them too? or we shall be obliged to think ill of somebody. Laugh as much as you choose, but you will not laugh me out of my opinion. My dearest Lizzie, but do consider in what a disgraceful light it places Mr. Darcy to be treating his father's favourite in such a manner, one whom his father had promised to provide for. It is impossible. No man of common humanity, no man who has the value of his character could be capable of it. Can his most intimate friends be so excessively deceived of him? Oh, no. I can much more easily believe Mr. Bingley's being imposed on, that Mr. Wickham should invent such a history of himself as he gave me last night, names, facts, everything mentioned, without ceremony. If it be not so, let Mr. Darcy contradict it. Besides, there was truth in his looks. It is difficult, indeed. It is distressing. One does not know what to think. I beg your pardon. One knows exactly what to think. But Jane could not with certainty on only one point, that Mr. Bingley, if he had been imposed on, would have much to suffer when the affair became public. The two young ladies were summoned from their shrubbery when the conversation passed by the arrival of some of the very persons of whom they had been speaking. Mr. Bingley and his sisters came to give their personal invitation for the long-expected ball at Netherfield, which was fixed for the following Tuesday. The two ladies were delighted to see their dear friend again, call it an age since they had met, and repeatedly asked what she had been doing with herself since their separation. To the rest of the family they paid little attention, avoiding Mrs. Bennet as much as possible, saying not much to Elizabeth and nothing at all to the others. They were soon gone again, rising from their seats with an activity which took their brother by surprise, and hurrying off as if eager to escape from Mrs. Bennet's civilities. The prospect of the Netherfield ball was extremely agreeable to every female of the family. Mrs. Bennet chose to consider it as given in compliment to her eldest daughter, and was particularly flattered by receiving the invitation from Mr. Bingley himself, instead of a ceremonious card. Jane pictured to herself a happy evening of the society of her two friends, and the attentions of their brother, and Elizabeth thought with pleasure of dancing a great deal with Mr. Wickham, and of seeing a confirmation of everything in Mr. Darcy's looks and behavior. The happiness anticipated by Catherine and Lydia depended less on every single event or any particular person, for though they each, like Elizabeth, meant to dance half the evening with Mr. Wickham, he was by no means the only partner who could satisfy them, and a ball was, at any rate, a ball. And even Mary could assure her family that she had no disinclination for it. "Well, I can have my morning to myself," said she. "It is enough. I think it no sacrifice to join occasionally in evening engagements. Society has claims on us all, and I profess myself one of those who consider intervals of recreation and amusement as desirable for everybody." Elizabeth's spirits were so high on the occasion that though she did not often speak unnecessarily to Mr. Collins, she could not help asking him whether he intended to accept Mr. Bingley's invitation, and if he did, whether he would think it proper to join in the evening's amusement, and she was rather surprised to find that he entertained no scruple whatever on that head, and was very far from dreading a rebuke either from the Archbishop or Lady Catherine de Bow by venturing to dance. "I am by no means of opinion, I assure you," said he, "that a ball of this kind, given by a young man of character, to respectable people, can have any evil tendency. But I am so far objecting to dancing myself, that I shall hope to be honored with the hands of all your fair cousins in the course of the evening. And I take this opportunity of soliciting yours, Miss Elizabeth, for the first 2 dances especially, a preference which I trust my cousin Jane will attribute to the right cause, and not any disrespect for her. Elizabeth felt herself completely taken in. She had fully proposed being engaged by Wickham for all those dances, and to have Mr. Collins instead. Her liveliness had been never worse timed. There was no help for it, however. Mr. Wickham's happiness and her own were perforce delayed a little longer, and Mr. Collins' proposal accepted with as good a grace as she could. She was not the better pleased with his gallantry, for the idea of it suggested of something more. And now first struck her that she was selected from among her quadrille table. Oh no, sorry. From her sisters as worthy of being the mistress of Hunsford Parsonage, and of assuring to form a quadrille table of Rosings, in the absence of more eligible visitors. The idea soon reached to conviction, and she observed his increasing civilities toward herself, and heard his frequent attempt at a compliment on her wit and vivacity. And though more astonished than gratified herself by the effect of his charms, it was not so long before her mother gave her to understand that the probability of their marriage was exceedingly agreeable to her. Elizabeth, however, did not choose to take the hint, being well aware that a serious dispute must be the consequence of any reply. Mr. Collins might never make the offer. Until he did, it was useless to quarrel about him. If there had not been a Netherfield ball to prepare for and talk of, the young Miss Bennets would have been in a pitiable state at this time, for from the day of the invitation to the day of the ball, there was such a succession of rain as prevented to their walking to Meryton once. No aunt, no officers, no news could be sought after. The very shoe roses of Netherfield were got by proxy. Even Elizabeth might have found some trial of her patience in weather, which totally suspended the improvement of her acquaintance with Mr. Wickham, and nothing less than a dance on Tuesday could have been made such a Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and Monday endurable to Kitty and Lydia. Okay, that was chapter 15 through 17 of Pride and Prejudice. Where did my bookmark go? Oh, there it is. Thank you for listening. And I will be back in 1 week to read the next sections. And yeah. Thank you again. And I hope you have a lovely day or a lovely night wherever you are. Okay. Bye.